Good morning, everybody. Pastor Stitch, Narrow Path Christian Church, BC, Bay City, Michigan. Also the North Central Chaplain for Broken Chains, JC. Welcome to the Biker Devotional. Today is March 22nd, 2026. We're looking at Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 3. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 3 says this: a sensible person sees danger and takes cover, but the inexperienced keep going and are punished. Have you ever had an occasion where you knew that it was time to be focused on the Lord? Maybe you were in prayer, or maybe you were reading your Bible. Maybe it was just an everyday moment, and you knew that in that moment you should be focused on God. There wasn't something that your absolute attention needed to be on in that moment. We all have. The reality is we recognize those moments where we should be focused on God, and something happens. You have a fantasy thought come into your mind. Now, I know most of you went to the idea of sexual fantasy, and that is a very powerful distractor in and of itself. And so sexual fantasies definitely are these things of danger, but it could be any fantasy. It could be just the fantasy of that new car, that new motorcycle, that trip you want to take, that friendship that you long for, that relationship with a parent that you've been missing. It's not a reality, but you start dwelling in that fantasy. You actually start giving it time, and you look at how it plays out. Maybe you've had a negative relationship with a neighbor, but you want a good relationship with that neighbor, and so you start figuring out, what would it look like if we had a good relationship? Those aren't bad things, are they? The problem is they're fantasy. They're not reality. And when we put ourselves in a position where we live in fantasy, we're in danger. Solomon says a sensible person sees that danger and does something about it. Just recently, I had a situation like that come up where I had a fantasy that came into my head, and, I knew it was leading me down a bad path, but man, it felt good. I didn't want to walk away from it. And I wanted to figure out how to make it happen. But I recognized the danger in it, and I addressed my current condition. I addressed it as fantasy, and I realized that what I've got is what I need. God has given me everything I need in the moment. And I addressed it. A little bit later, it came back, raging back in, and I had to address it again, because fantasy loves to play the what-if game. But Solomon also reminds us that the inexperienced just keep going and end up falling into the trap of that fantasy. Maybe it is some desire for another woman or another man. If you don't do something about that fantasy and address what it is that God has given you in the moment, and live in the presence of God in this moment, you will find yourself chasing after things that weren't yours to have, and you will do what you can to get them, even if it means destroying what you do have. Maybe it's something that deals with your finances. Maybe it's that new job that makes you move away from what it is that God has for you. Maybe it is that relationship with that neighbor that was never supposed to be. At least not in the way that you thought it was supposed to be. The reality is we find ourselves living in fantasy often because, well, reality is difficult. In my readings today, Moses got told one final time by God, look, you didn't honor me in front of all the Israelites. You and Aaron made me look bad by getting angry. And I told you, you would not go into the promised land because of it. We think that might be harsh, but the reality is, in a moment of anger and fantasy, Moses chose wrongly. God let him see it with his own eyes. I can imagine not just standing on top of a mountaintop overlooking it, but I can imagine that God allowed Moses to actually see. The descriptor in Deuteronomy gives us a much better idea that Moses actually saw, but he didn't get to enter in. And then Moses, being completely healthy, without any failings whatsoever, at 120 years old, dropped dead, and God buried him in the valley. A sensible person sees danger and takes cover. Inexperienced keep going and are punished. That's called justice, and our God is just. So today, as we go out into the world, we're going to have a chance where fantasy may come in, and we will want to just say, oh, it's just a thought, or, whatever. Well, the reality is even those thoughts, if they keep you outside of your present moment, can be dangerous. Now, is it wrong to have some goal? No, absolutely not. I have a neighbor that I would love to have a closer relationship with. But the reality is, I have the relationship I have with him because I've done the work. When we first moved into this place, they were partiers and they were bikers. And they had a huge party, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, they were lighting off fireworks. And I'm not a big guy, but I decided to stand up to them. It took years to overcome that. I thought that I could go do things my way, and that didn't work out. And today, on occasion, he comes over and helps me work on my bike, and on occasion, I go over and help him work on his. But the reality is, we can't have the relationship we might have been able to have had I seen the danger and done something differently. Something to think about today. Are you living in fantasy? Are you capturing the fantasy in the moment and just saying, the reality of my life is what God has for me? It's important to think about today. I love y'all. Hope you have a great day. God bless.